Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm your host, Ruan, and welcome to Dragon's Voice. Unfortunately, as you can tell, my stuff is going haywire, so if it's all garbly and stuff, I'm sorry, but we are going to have to cancel. There's just no way I can go ahead and do this episode, which makes me really sad because it was going to be a wild episode. And so let me put it down here. Might have to cancel due to technical difficulties. Make sure. So if you can hear this and it's not too bad, please leave a message in the comments so that I know whether you can hear me well or not. Yeah, I think so. I haven't issues. So how well can you hear me, Jill? Because if it's decent enough, I may actually go on and do what I can, and maybe next week pick a different quote, or we can redo this one, and that's when we can get your input. Um, let's see, because yeah, if you can hear me well enough, I can go ahead and continue. So let me go ahead and start the script, and we can go from there then. So, of course, hail and welcome. This is A Dragon's Voice. I am Ruan, and today there was going to be a really cool episode. Me and Caru would be having a discussion with another um, individual from the community. Now, A Dragon's Voice is a weekly broadcast of the House of Dawn and Doniaid communities, with the goal of providing an understanding of various subjects, from Wicca and traditional witchcraft to ceremonial magic and the ancient fairy faith. Today we would have had two individuals. I would have been joined by Caru and a special guest, Medolwyn. Medolwyn has been initiated in a couple traditions of witchcraft. He was first initiated in 1974 in an English tradition, Watersmeet Coven of St. Louis, Dwynwen Mwyn, a Welsh tradition of witchcraft, and the Gardnerary tradition under Lady Tara of Hightor. He grew up, though, with Native American traditions as part of his upbringing. Now, unfortunately, they're not going to be able to make it. So, I'm going to go ahead and do this quote by Raven Grimassi from his book, The Cauldron of Memory, Retrieving Ancestral Knowledge and Wisdom. As a lot of us know, the idea of genetic memory isn't new to the occult scene and has been one of the bases of a darker chapter of the world's history, with what would have eventually become the Third Reich and the Holocaust. My first introduction to this idea of genetic memory and prophecy came from a very influential and epic book series, Dune by Frank Herbert, followed by my encounters with a fringe occult organization called the Imperial and Royal Dragon Court, and the controversial His Royal Highness Prince Nicholas de Vere von Drakenberg. Now, he proposes in his books, The Dragon Legacy and The Dragon Seed, the idea of genetic memory is at the heart of this, the ability to channel and be possessed by the spirits of their ancestors. and in this way, they served in the role of the sacred king, a la the Merovingian dynasty. This is what is truly meant when one is of witch blood, and the familiar spirits which they mediate fate. In this episode, I will be discussing a quote by Raven Grimassi, a virtual juggernaut within the witchcraft community. And that book, like I mentioned, is The Cauldron of Memory. And I was looking for a link to a small business website that sells books so that I would not have to use Amazon.com to go ahead and cause issues. But anyways, the quote goes something like this. We do not internally possess the memories of everyone who ever lived on the earth, although we can access the collective through morphic resonance. We directly possess not only the memories of our blood relatives, however, this does not negate the idea that we also possess what are called soul memories, accumulated over many lifetimes spent in a variety of different bloodlines. It is interesting to note that a belief exists in many old witch families that a soul can choose to return, um, could return within the same bloodline and live again as a descendant. This is, in part, the importance of witch blood in some family traditions. Now, as a fam trad myself, I was introduced to the idea of witch blood by my grandpa. Yeah, I know what people think about those who propose such an idea, but we have reached enough generations of self proclaimed witches, and it isn't a far fetched idea now. It is believed by many that to have witch blood, that one was different than normal people, and it was quite common in witchcraft traditions. Now, with witch blood, you are drawn to the occult, almost compelled to seek it, to have psychic abilities such as prophetic dreams and the manipulation of magical energy. Within traditional witchcraft, there is mention of such Abrahamic concepts as the Nephilim, the Rigori, they are also called. Now, a group of angels had came down to have intercourse with human women and bred half Grigori, half human hybrids. The common idea also comes from folklore that fairies were involved. It is my expressed opinion, based on years of looking at such things mentioned on the History Channel, Ancient Aliens, that there is enough proof to really look at this concept. But this also means that all of mankind has witch blood, however changed over time. So I do believe that our ancestors have definitely imprinted themselves upon our blood and bone, and that those with a predilection towards things magical are influenced by genetic memory. Here, let me take off that banner now. We'll put that down there. We'll take that off. We are born with the instinct to be scared of the dark, the unknown, and other people and things. This could be our memory of events that occurred to our genetic ancestors, something in the blood. This likewise posits such things. And with this, the folklore of a people will notice how specific families of people seem to have that natural knack towards knowing little recipes or to say certain words and bringing things to come to pass. They became the wise person of a community. And this wisdom, however diluted, changed, or science has demystified, are part of our collective and individual histories. As for recalling these genetic memories, there are a variety of ways. A near death experience, being born intersect, like myself, years of study and practice, and so many more. In Dune, We have young Paul Atreides, who, through the genetic memory of his ancestors and his gift of prophecy, overthrew the Carino emperors, as well as their ancient rival family, the Harkonnen. Then there is his sister, Alia. She was born with those genetic memories. She was preborn. But she was also able to access those genetic memories, the personalities or resonances within the blood, and was bullied by her grandfather, literally the head of the Harkonnen family himself. And he, in this personality, took control of her will. She became what the series called Abomination, they said. So, there is the philosophical view of genetic memory in action. I also believe that family traditions can start with a couple of people finding witchcraft. This has also been my experience. The witch blood exists inside all of us. I mean, even look at, you know, folklore and history. It just takes a spark to ignite the red thread, the red dragon that we spoke of the other day. And that is then where the white thread, the white dragon, comes in. Once the witch blood is awakened, ancestral knowledge retrieval occurs on a greater level, and it begins and happens more often. Now, it's really hard for the witch community to accept these concepts today. The idea of everyone being co-equal. Most people focus on that genetic idea. You know, everyone wants to feel special, different even. Like they could change the world. But the thing is, they don't realize that they already are. It helps in some ways to be raised around and mentored in the ways of witchcraft. But there's also the idea that where did the first witch come from? They came from being chosen, so to speak, by the divine itself, or in my case, in my tradition, the fairies, which indwell the world around us. We make pacts, and I know people hate this term, but covenants with various spirits, and it activates that witch blood. It brings fire to it, and it reminds me of the Silmarillion. And yes, I will constantly be picking stuff from Tolkien because I am a original co-founder actually, of TL Delieva, a Tolkien Elven spiritual path, who has now finally got IRS acceptance and is really out there now. And so I'm mindful that in the Silmarillion, in actually the first part, the Ainu Lindale, the music of the Einar, that there is the flame imperishable that Morgoth, the Dark Lord that came before Sauron of Lord of the Rings fame, had gone into the void to seek something called the flame imperishable, because that is what allowed Eru Iluvatar to create all that is, to give it life, such as when the dwarves were created by Aule, they were mute, they were automatons, artificial elementals, and it was with the flame imperishable and of course the mediation of Eru Iluvatar that he gave them life. And so there is that chance of having the witch fire, having the flame imperishable, literally affect your genetics in certain ways. Now, the idea of witch blood and accessing the genetic memories kind of is really hard for people to accept nowadays. Um, Within myself, it manifested at a very young age through childhood trauma, neglect, abuse, and I do believe personally the that one of the things that manifested as, and that would be autism. That would be bipolar disorder. For even they are like being between the worlds. They are kind of forced by spirit to um, to be changed, to kind of have a predeterminate pact with an entity that they will gift you these abilities, and in return there are certain things, certain taboos and stuff that one must fulfill to retain that gift. Now, one of the legends in my family, or like I said, all this is mytho-history, people. This is not me saying this is for a fact that I'm somewhat better than anyone else, because I'm not. And there are many other family witches nowadays. And so it is my understanding that one idea of gaining and losing prophetic gift is there was a myth that my grandpa wrote down that the Merlin was gifted the ability of prophecy based off of being a child of no mortal father. For with that mating, witch blood kind of was awoken within him at a very young age, and that there was a taboo that that he had to remain celibate as a gift in return for the gift of prophecy. Now, in our family tradition, this myth goes on to say that, after all of his enchantments, all of his workings and stuff, and this is kind of mentioned in um, actual folklore, is that he had a slip, a lapse. He was kind of coerced through fate to break this taboo, and it is common in stories. I mean, the Cataract of Kuni is one example of taboos being broken, and that he fell in love or was manipulated into a sexual teacher mentor relationship with a being, with a person, and that's when his gift disappeared, and that she drained all of his magic and trapped him in an oak. Now, they say that he was trapped there in the oak alive as a traitor's death, but I kind of think that what that really means is that he was gifted and he had to give back to the oak. And while the etymology of oak and druid has been mentioned to be, co-equal, it kind of makes one think about that myth or legend. And so these gifts, that fire, can be doused. And we happen to see this in many cases, where someone will manifest certain abilities, telekinesis, even aspects of levitation. And, it happens maybe once, maybe a couple times, and then it never happens again. And I believe that that has to do with the witch power, the witch fire, the fire between the horns of Baphomet, that gift that Prometheus gave us. And then in some people continued, even if it was under fairy folklore, um, certain traditions, certain promises made. And so that is where the concept of bloodlines comes in. The idea of re-experiencing something that may have been experienced by an ancestor will likewise bring the possibility of genetic memory. Um, and this is accessible to anyone. This is accessible to anyone. It is an open practice because the fact that this stuff is pre-civilization. It is the common collective core of even who we are as human beings. That we were gifted this knowledge, whether through some supernatural entities, superhuman entities, or even the genetic ancestors in our blood. And that over time, certain other cultures came in and came to fear these people. And so once a flame was started, then the whole forest burned. And what I mean by that is the continual um, murdering of mostly innocent people being proclaimed as witches. And even then, what did the witch do? The witch mediated between the seen and the unseen, with that which is within and that which is without, and that those were the ancestors. For I truly do believe that the gods and goddesses were based off of real experiences. We see many stories of like Thomas the Rhymer being loved by the fairy queen and was given certain gifts, particularly the gift of of bardry and the Awen, just like Taliesin in the story of Keswin and her cauldron. And so that is why Raven Grimassi called his book The Cauldron of Memory, because within that cauldron can be said to be the blood uh, that is within oneself. And so in the story of Taliesin, the doing of the bellows by the blind, I think his name was Morda. He would stoke the fire, the flame imperishable underneath the cauldron, and within it was every wisdom distilled as water or as a liquid. I like when I talk to my child and stuff about certain spells I do, I sit there and say we are making a potion. And that is exactly what it is. We are making a potion off of various aspects of our own being. We are aligning ourselves with our wandering soul. We are aligning ourselves in life to our breathing soul. And that the witch blood is stoked by Morda and stirred by Guianbach, who eventually would become Taliesin when he is initiated by receiving the 3 drops of Awen. And that, the Awen, is the result, in my opinion, of the stoking of the witch blood within oneself. And so in that story, we see how he received all knowledge. And what I mean by that is he recites a poem. And in fact, this is his greatest poem ever, where he explains that, he remembers the fall of the Tower of Babel. He remembers being a fish in the sea. He remembers being all these formerly existing communities of life that went in to make him. And that also is a form of genetic memory. I mean, to go back far enough, evolution has shown that, we came from the ocean. We came from the waters. And so in the end, the waters dwell within us. And that water is the potion that brings Awen. And so with the idea that's within this quote, let me pull it back up. Usually I have this on my computer, and with the internet being tweaky, I have to double task with my computer in one part and my phone in the other. And so, as mentioned here, with the first line, it goes, "We do not internally possess the memories of everyone who has ever lived on the earth." Witch blood. Though we can access the collective through morphic resonance. That is the racial consciousness. It is believed that a certain consciousness of a group of people holding certain beliefs will create the 99th monkey effect, the butterfly effect, that The idea is that when enough people believe a certain thing or learn a certain thing, it'll hit a climax, and every one of those species will instinctively know to do or not do this thing. And it's the same thing with the witch blood. Um, this, of course, I'm referring to as the white thread. Now, second one says, we directly possess only the memories of our blood relatives. Emphasis, blood relatives. And so I mentioned in the beginning about the controversial figure and a group that I was involved with. And I'm actually still friends with many of them, though we do not talk as often as we used to. And that was the Imperial and Royal Dragon Corps. And um, some of the stuff that was written by Lawrence Gardner of Holy Blood, of that idea of special families descended from the Anunnaki, uh, being different, having pure blood that allowed them to easily channel their ancestors. And I was a proponent of this for a very long time. In fact, I met Nick maybe a couple times over internet, and very controversial idea that is still looked down. And in fact, there was many controversies, there was many arguments, there was much slander put on against this man and against those who believe these ideas. And that's okay. Everyone has a right to their own opinion and their own understanding, their gnosis, when. And so it is believed that these individuals were descended from the gods. In fact, the House of Dawn, which I am Pendraig of, what I inherited from my grandpa, speaks very much the same thing. And so that is why in Doniaid, the tribal organization, the FamTrad that I am opening up as an adjunct of the House of Dawn, believes very much in this concept. In fact, some of it can be, some of my own stuff can be somewhat verified by the works of Ruthwim Gower of Itwitag Dwinian Win. Some of it, of course, can be verified by Nick DeVere and, the Grail Dragon Bloodline idea. Now, also, let's see. Yes, Robert Clark mentions trace memory, race memory, vestigial memory, same difference, all locked in our instinctive or subconscious mind. Absolutely. Very much like how we inherit, like I mentioned earlier, about fear of the dark, a apprehension of certain animals. It is kind of instilled in our blood, and it's very much the same concept that I view when we do certain actions. It's Raven Grimassi also talks about, a type of mechanism, a what is it? Memory chain association. If you do something or experience something, it'll tap open the experiences of your ancestors, and you may have a greater talent for it, such as music, wood carving, construction, even being a police officer. It's very much the same idea, except why go back only certain far? Learn to experience some of the stuff your ancestors did. Like, for instance, now that I'm living the trailer life once again, I have to do my laundry to save money through one of those hand cranks. And oh my gosh, it is very, very invigorating. And I had a response to doing such. And it was almost like it put me into a trance. And anyone who's done something repetitively, they will go into trance. It'll happen quicker and more often. And I think it's the same way with like doing certain um stuff that's from like old wives' tales and stuff. This certain potion or this herb will heal you in this way. The passing on of that through successive lines, you may, in fact, subconsciously come up come up with that idea of doing that thing that way. And so I believe it's the same thing when it comes to magic, to you know each succeeding generation. Now, it also goes in the next line of this quote. However, this does not negate the idea that we also possess what are called soul memories, accumulated over many lifetimes, spent in a variety of different bloodlines. And so the wandering self that I talk about, the truly immortal that manifests maybe as the fetch follower, the co-walker, the psychopomp that brings us to the other side, um, may incarnate in various different families to gain various types of wisdom. Now, I'm not saying that I believe in the idea that everything is pre-planned, that we do not have a sense of free will, but I do believe in the power of interaction. I do not believe in the idea of a hard self that is pre-planned, a lesson to come to Earth at this time, to achieve certain things, to transcend this world. I personally don't believe that. I believe we are very much immanent within, and that the ideas of various planes is almost too much of a labeling, that it's too transcendent, but that merely looking at the myths and legends and seeing the seen world, since I'm Kimreich, the seen world being Yechilch, a bread, and the unseen would be the Kilch, a Nuvin, and that's all that was needed. Of course, later on, the idea infiltrated, well, not infiltrated, but evolved with the idea of Yakil Gwynvid, the world of perfection. And I view that more as not necessarily anything transcendent, but anything above our own earth. So you've got the underworld and you have the upper world. What my grandfather taught me is that when we erect our kyre, make our circle castings, and we go withershins, we are moving ourselves into a nuven. Now, when we cast our circle, erect our kyre, and we go jessel or sunwise, we are traveling the tree up into the branches where there are many spirits that may be able to guide us. Um, Now, whether it's the idea of the mighty dead and versus, those who, reincarnate. Now, what I mean by mighty dead is I mean the idea of being a fairy friend, one of the justified ones, where through certain events you can almost keep your breath soul, which is solely of the seen world, um, and your wandering self intact, um, and that they co-walk with us. They guide us. They are our closest allies in living this life, and that through the white thread we can access that, because in the end, morphic resonance. We are all related. We are all human beings. Um, and so that soul memory can also be explained by the story of Taliesin. It was awoken within this person. And so sometimes when we get these sparks of ancestral knowledge and wisdom, um, what happens is we may have a thought, we may have a vision, we may experience something, we may hear voices, or even see our ancestors. And that what this does is that it changes us. It awakens that part of ourself to experience the soul memories of our species. Now, of course, the next line in this quote, which if anyone hadn't caught it, it is the Cauldron of Memory, retrieving ancestral wisdom, knowledge and wisdom by Raven Grimassi. And so this quote continues. It is interesting to note that a belief exists in many old witch families that a soul can choose to return within the same bloodline and live again as a descendant. Now, this is the one that can be extremely controversial. And in fact, earlier today, I was reading an article, I believe, that was on Pathos by Matt Aron concerning this topic, and I thought it was very appropriate. And that's exactly the other thing. When we have this unverified personal gnosis, if it is indeed true and you are on the right wavelength, that confirmation of this will come your way. And while I hate using this idea as a former Mormon, this is kind of the idea of oh, come on, brain fart. This is the idea of receiving revelation that through study, practice, openness, that something other will tell you something or express something. And thus it is a true revelation. You will see that as you learn something, if it's true in some way, shape, or form, that information, that experience will come to you to verify that, yes, we've tried to tell you. Now, you shouldn't really doubt us in this experience. And so that is actually one of the roots of the traditions of like the more ceremonial magicians, oh, I lost it. That thought just went out. But it's really, honestly, it's really hard to talk about the subject because since it is very much looked down upon, even by those more traditional witches and pagans and sorcerers, unfortunately, the paradigm works. And in the end, as every individual comes to realize, or at least that's what my interviews with other people say, is that this concept of genetic memory, this concept of witch blood, the concept of having family traditions, is actually more common than people think. Now, I'm not saying it's like a big tradition where there's no holes in the knowledge, that it's completely passed down from witch to witch to witch in each generation with a big book of shadows stuff that records this stuff, because that's not the way it worked. In fact, for the longest time, to even have a book was to be sketchy, because the church leaders did not want the populace to be able to read. And at that time, it was mostly, scripture stuff, because the church and stuff wanted to maintain control over the populace. And so to have a big book implicated yourself as being what they called a heretic, because they believed at that time that everyone was truly Christian at heart, merely because they performed a baptism, received a confirmation, go to church services out of fear. And so they were called heretics. Now, if they were indeed truly pagan, they would not be heretics. And so the Inquisition shouldn't have even touched them. But there was a spark of fear that these witch families existed and would cast spells and curses upon their neighbors, and that they gain their power through a familiar spirit, and usually an ancestor of some sort. And I hope I don't botch this. It's kind of the idea of the physicians of Mythi. I probably mispronounced it. I'm still learning Welsh, so give me a little latitude. But they, through the gift of a fairy entity, were gifted with the knowledge of healing. And this happened for many, many generations. And so there's another proof that not only do family traditions exist, but that there was a carrying on of knowledge, and that it's quite possible that these people reincarnated in their own descendants so that the knowledge would never completely die. And that, of course, then led me to reading more of Raven Grimassi stuff. And now he was one of my mentors, one of my earliest mentors, actually. And so I've read pretty much all of his books. And so it makes me think of the story that he wrote, his version of Aradia, Gospel of the Witches, through his first book, Ways of the Strega, which is where I got started. And that's the idea further in there in the prophecies section of the words of Aradia. And it basically goes something like this, that one will reincarnate, will remember, and be born among certain soul families, soul groups, and that they would remember and love and live together once again in some way, shape, or form. And so that kind of gives proof that there is a connection between, I personally think, bloodlines. And in my own understanding. Of course, Raven Grimassi also talks about the fairy in the terms of the elven race that likewise taught many a human, herbalism, the gifts of listening and understanding the wind and its words, of being able to call upon magical forces to cause, as Crowley says, change and conformity with will. Of course, law, love under law. Love under will. And so, while being controversial, I truly believe that there are indeed witch families, not unlike mine, that they really did exist, that maybe Alexander's of, the Alexandrian tradition fame was indeed what he said what he was, that, he learned his stuff from his grandmother, I believe it was, that even that controversial figure, my old friend and another mentor, Nicholas de Vere, said that, his own ancestors kept alive a lot of wisdom. And of course, the de Vere family goes into like the belief that even Shakespeare himself was actually Edward de Vere, and that there was a lot of fairy folklore placed in it to kind of remind the British monarchy, about, some of the older ways and traditions of Britain. We also have my own relatives, the Wynn family of Gwydir. Sorry, like I said, I'm still learning. in their own tradition, as mentioned by Dwayne Wynn and Taliesin of, oh, what was that? Was it? Can't remember what magazine and stuff it was, but he was a Welshman, and he was one of the first ones to talk against Gerald Gardner himself, and say that there is a different tradition out there that was not Gardnerian, wasn't Wicca, and that he himself um, had this bloodline connection. And when I was doing my own genealogy work to verify, confirm, or to prove false a lot of the things that my grandpa told me growing up, because, take everything with a heaping, set of salt and, reason it out in your own mind. I did indeed find um, the ancestral connections between my family and theirs, um, and that one of my first ancestors that came to me through accessing genetic memory was Melgwyn Pendraig, a very controversial figure among the people around him at that time. It is believed that his uncle was actually Arthwis ap Mirig, one of the contenders for King Arthur, and thus a sort of verification that, yes, Adam Ruan, excuse me, I'm still slipping into my dead name, that we indeed descend from the line of King Arthur, and that in a way, through the generations, the title, obligations, responsibilities of the vision of the vision of King Arthur, that, while maybe not completely true in the sense that this is, what he did, but that the ideas of rule by law, of compassion, honor, and loyalty, and promises mean something, and that this set of promises was given to his children and his grandchildren and many other children, and that only some of the family would manifest the gifts of the sight. It wasn't a straight line. This was not a father to son to father to son um, inheritance. It was based on not only whether you had the abilities, but was like any druidic order, that would have to be a confirmation by a council of elders, members of the family, whether immediate or extended, to confirm that you are now the paterfamilias or materfamilias of the family. You are the Pendraig, and it is our responsibility as your arch druids to help you support help support you in achieving the goals that the family um, has set before them. And in our family, it was the idea of a place, a sacred place to provide sanctuary, to teach and help and guide, and to work together to build a better world. And that place, he called it Cernotha. Very Welsh. Like I said, I don't know much Welsh, but I'm working on that. But my grandfather spoke it so fluently that it touched me on some deep core. And I think that's part of the reason that my spirit and the spirit of my Welsh ancestors is the strongest. Um, Now, if I go father to father to father to father on my paternal side, it supposedly leads back to William the Conqueror, and thus the mythical Rollo of the Vikings' fame. And I've never jived with that branch of the family. It's always been the Welsh. And as I was looking for other Welsh witches in the before before we had such wonderful Welsh witches out there, such as Mara Starling, such as Chris Hughes, and even in the Goidelic sense, Laura O'Brien, Morgan Daimler, to kind of give us those confirmations or denials of what we receive through genetic memory. And now, before we end this show, I want to give you an idea of the exercise, the ritual that I use in talking to my ancestors to regain lore that I would have had if my own father did not destroy my stuff that I inherited from my grandfather, genealogical records, his own journals, what he received from his own daddy, back to where it connects to the Welsh line, you know, um, of course, written uh, successively, handwritten each generation to keep the books in decent order, because old parchments fall apart. But my father, my relatives in this generation and the previous either did not manifest any of the abilities of the sites and thus were ignorant of the family tradition itself, or they knew, did not have the gift, and came to hate the inheritance. And so when I started manifesting my gift and my grandfather kind of took me under his wing, my father, being a fundamentalist Christian, yes, I was born with focus on the family, um, but I was also being taught by my grandfather. Now, with that, I did pick up a piece of advice on how to access and fill in those gaps. Because, of course, my father destroyed everything. My father got rid of everything. My father fought so hard against me. It was an inquisition. And that is where the major part of my abuse came from. My trauma that set me up, I believe, to have these gifts, to do these things, to now be what one of my Patreon patrons calls his witcher, a witch on well, let's just say being like a lawyer, on retainer, excuse me. And this method is called, now Peter Patton would call it tapping the bone. For my family, we called it consulting the head of Bran. Now, Bran Bendigid was a god form. We believe also an ancestor in the House of Dawn. And through certain things that happened, he ended up, dying. They cut off his head to return it to what is now the Tower of London so that he would protect the Isle of Britain. And for 40 days, 40 days or 40 years, he counseled the 7 people who survived the reaving of Anun for the cauldron, for the grail, so to speak. And it is through this exercise, not one that I've actually seen in Raven's book, that by consulting the head of Bran, using, of course, a simulacrum, using a skull of some sort, preferably one that you can light a candle behind, that it would shine through the eyes when it reached a certain level, that you could tap into the collective unconscious, the subconscious, access genetic memory, ask questions, and that this was very much akin to the domestic cult of the dead. and that at one point everyone could do this. Um, Particularly among the Celts, we see, headhunters and that concept. And so we would consult the head of Bram, calling forth whatever ancestors we needed to, and thus retrieve knowledge. And that is the source of my material, is through accessing that genetic memory through consulting the head of Bram. Now, to do it, to actually get it to work, of course, you have to what we call erect the Kyre, establish the circle, so to speak. We place the skull towards the north. We have a north-oriented focus with this. And when we erect the Kyre, we will go Withershins. If we're going to Anuvan, we would go Jessel if we are going to Gwynfyd, and we would call on an ancestor or a spirit to help answer a question. Now, we would receive the answer either through, like with me, it was more of an intuitive knowledge. And then once it was spoken, like the Pythia, the Sibyl, the Sibyl of Pythia, it would be locked away. And then what would happen is something would come to me. Someone would say something, an article would be written, a new discovery among science and stuff would come out, activate that memory, and say, yeah, I knew this. Thank you for letting me know. And so ancestral work is very important to the witch blood. Ancestral work is important to everyone. Everyone has this ability to tap the bone to receive this information. It is not something that is only for people of witch blood. It is for everyone. And this book, Raven Grimassi's book, The Cauldron of Memory, Retrieving Ancestral Knowledge and Wisdom, is a good start to really look into this idea. And I heartily recommend it. Unfortunately, we are near the end of our show. Now, this ministry, as the ticker says below, is being sponsored by my Patreon patrons and viewers and clients like you. Now, if you are interested in helping this ministry to grow, to provide more information, then you can either leave a one-time stuff through either PayPal, and unfortunately I have my dead name here and it drives me nuts, but you can either send donation to PayPal at Reverend Adam, the letter J, Heydon at gmail.com. You can leave a donation through Cash App at RuanDeHeydon, which is my new given name. Or you can, if you really feel that call that you just need to learn more about what I have to say, which would be awesome. I'm not touting myself as any special figure, I got a history, I got a history with this stuff. But if you really feel that you want to support this work, to help build the idea of Caernarfon, to even maybe at some point work together in a tribal situation, then you can go over to patreon.com/RuanDeHeydon. Now, on my Patreon account, I have, I believe, 5 different tiers of suggested donations. Each tier has a special benefit and a complimentary gift involved. The lowest one is even less than a pack of cigarettes or a cup of coffee or tea at Starbucks. $5 is the first tier level. I believe with that one, you also get a free complimentary 3-card tarot reading. I believe the second one is $10, where you get that reading monthly. You get a distant healing. And I think I've got a $15 and maybe a $20. And that when you get the tarot reading, you get the distant healing, and you get offerings and petitions done on your behalf to the good neighbors, which I do work with, my familiar spirits. And I have the $30 level. This one is for those who wish to either attend forthcoming lectures, um, or workshops that I may come out with, and or wishing to be counted among the kin of the House of Dawn of the Doniaid. Now, to be members of this, you don't have to be, well, to be a part of the Doniaid, you don't need to give much. You can be in other organizations. It's more of a collective of people hoping to survive these really dark and dystopian times. Now, of course, if you are of the House of Dawn, we have only three methods of inclusion. That would be birth, marriage, and adoption. Now, with the adoption, what happens is you you learn with us, we learn with you. If you feel that call to go deeper, you will go through, and I know a lot of my friends who know about Ruthven Gower, the Celtic Church of Doniaid. This is very much similar to their work. You will go on what we call a vigil. You will um, if you will be presented before the patrons, and I mean that with all due respect and not in a patriarchal sense. Beli Maur, the Great Mother Dawn, and of course Yaplant Lear and the whole Yaplant Dawn, and to receive a name, and that's it. You are family. You are part of this family, of which I am currently the Pendrake of. Um, Now, if you choose to do the $30 level and you are a member and you choose to give regular donation, this is the level you'll want to do, because you'll get discounts also on those workshops, as part of um, a teaching coven scenario. I don't want to call it an outer court or an outer circle, but I do consider it as part and parcel of education of, this tradition. And so, like I said, if you want to get involved with that, you can go to patreon.com/RuanDeHeydon. You can donate at PayPal at Reverend Adam J. Hayden at gmail.com, or Cash App at RuanDeHeydon. And of course, I also have my website. I have almost all my social media contacts there. I've got a blog that I honestly am way behind on updating, and that is at RuanDeHeydon.com. So, with that, I would like to leave you with a little blessing that I do on all my videos, and that is, may you never hunger, may you never thirst, and may the good neighbors always be with you. So mote it be.